Welcome in. If you're joining us today, you already know we skipped the surface level summaries.
Right. We just get right to the core of the material.
Exactly. And we have a deep dive custom tailored for your curious mind today. The stack of source material sitting between us is, well, it's incredibly dense.
Very dense.
We are looking at an exhaustive 2026 forensic and behavioral cold case review concerning the disappearance of Joseph David Wolfgang Pichler.
And the details are staggering.
They really are. But our mission here isn't just to tell a true crime story. We are untangling a massive web of competing theories: suicide, foul play, and a staged disappearance.
And perhaps most importantly, examining the systemic fallout. What happens when the very people meant to find the truth fall victim to investigative tunnel vision?
Yeah.
Because the documentation we are looking at is a profound study in how initial assumptions can permanently derail an investigation. Joe Pichler vanished in the early hours of January 5, 2006, and to really understand the sheer magnitude of the unanswered questions in this 2026 review, we have to look closely at behavioral victimology.
Meaning his psychological baseline, right?
Exactly. We need to analyze his daily habits at the time he disappeared. We also have to examine the specific geography of the Pacific Northwest and the stark clash between the official police narrative and the actual physical evidence left behind.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to grasp the bizarre nature of this case, you have to understand who Joe Pichler was, and his background is highly unusual.
He wasn't your typical 18-year-old.
No, not at all. He wasn't just a regular kid living in Washington State. Joe was a highly successful former child actor.
Anyone watching movies in the late 90s or early 2000s almost certainly saw him on screen.
Yeah, I mean, he had a notable role in the cult classic Varsity Blues. And he was the franchise lead in the Beethoven movie series.
Right.
So he was working alongside massive stars, experiencing the personal trailers, the press junkets, the national recognition that comes with that level of Hollywood exposure.
And the transition he made away from that life is the foundational piece of his behavioral profile.
How so?
Well, he started with regional commercials, moved down to Los Angeles, and achieved financial independence at an incredibly young age. He had a highly visible public persona.
Yeah.
But what the source material highlights is that his departure from Hollywood wasn't a result of roles drying up or his career stalling.
It was a choice.
Yes, a deliberate protective choice initiated by his mother, Kathy. She was deeply concerned about the environmental pressures of the Los Angeles child acting industry. She wanted him to have a normal upbringing back in his hometown of Bremerton, Washington.
So you have a teenager experiencing severe cultural whiplash. He goes from red carpets and studio lots back to the hallways of Bremerton High School.
It's a massive shift.
The review notes that by 2005, he graduates. And by January 2006, when he disappears, he's 18 and living independently in his own apartment on Magnuson Way.
Living a sort of dual existence.
Exactly. On one hand, he's still the former child star. On the other, he is working as a technician at a company called Teletech and picking up shifts ringing up customers at Discordia Games, which was a local hobby shop.
What's fascinating here is, despite this deliberate grounding in a normal local life, his acting career was far from over.
Right, which contradicts the official narrative.
Completely.
Wow.
It directly contradicts the idea of a sudden, hopeless suicide. Joe had highly active, future-oriented plans. His family reported that he fully intended to return to Los Angeles to resume his acting career.
He was just waiting on a medical thing, wasn't he?
A specific physical continuity issue, yes. He had metal dental braces on his top teeth, specifically with black rubber bands. He was scheduled to get those braces removed in early 2006.
And then head right back.
The stated plan was to head straight back to Hollywood immediately after. People experiencing a terminal mental health crisis do not typically make long-term cosmetic-dependent career plans.
That detail completely reframes his mindset. You don't plan a triumphant return to the screen if you were making definitive plans to end your life.
No, you don't.
Let's walk through the timeline, because the minute-by-minute reconstruction of his final known hours is full of jarring contradictions.
It really fractures.
We are looking at the night of Wednesday, January 4, rolling into the early morning of January 5, 2006. Joe is hosting a gathering at his Magnuson Way apartment with 4 close friends: Kelly, Justin, Kyle, and Nicole.
The sources note they are drinking and they are playing Magic, the Gathering.
Which you pointed out earlier is a vital behavioral marker. Help me understand the connection there. How does playing a card game inform the forensic profile of his mental state?
Well, as you know, Magic. The gathering isn't a passive activity. It requires immense cognitive load, intense strategic planning, and sustained focus.
You really had to be locked in.
Exactly. The friends who were present explicitly reported that Joe was in good spirits. He was laughing, engaged, and highly competitive.
Right.
That level of cognitive engagement contradicts the profile of someone who is actively disconnecting from reality or in the final stages of suicidal ideation. Yet, mere hours later, the timeline fractures.
The shift is incredibly abrupt. The gathering winds down, and at 2:30 a.m., Joe reportedly drives his friends to their respective homes. That establishes the last verified time he was operating his silver Toyota Corolla.
All right.
But then we hit the critical marker, 4:08 a.m. A call is placed from Joe's mobile phone to his friend Justin, and the Joe on the other end of that line is suddenly described as distraught and inconsolable.
It's a total reversal.
How do we reconcile that 180-degree emotional turn in less than 2 hours?
We have to factor in compounding environmental variables. The source text emphasizes that Joe had been consuming alcohol earlier in the evening.
Yeah.
By 4 a.m., you are also layering on severe sleep deprivation. Both of those elements act as massive multipliers for emotional volatility and impaired judgment.
That makes sense.
During this call, which lasts between 10 to 15 minutes, he is highly emotional and he begins reciting poetry to Justin.
But even in that compromised state, he makes a very specific request that doesn't fit the suicide narrative. He asks Justin to write the poetry down.
This raises an important question. If you are standing on the precipice, fully intending to end your own life in a matter of minutes, why are you asking a friend to preserve your creative thoughts for later?
You just wouldn't.
You don't ask someone to take dictation so you won't forget the words if you believe you have no future. Furthermore, Joe promised to call Justin back by 5:30 a.m. He was still making future commitments, even an hour out.
But that follow-up call, tragically, was never made.
No, it wasn't.
Which brings us to a 4-day gap. Total silence until January 9, when Joe's car, the 2005 Corolla, is located. It is found abandoned in a parking lot near the intersection of Wheaton Way and Sheridan Road in Bremerton.
And for the Bremerton Police Department, this specific location became the entire foundation of their case.
Because it sits about half a mile from the Port Madison Narrows, which is a major waterway crossed by a bridge.
The geographical proximity to that bridge became the anchor for the department's tunnel vision. But when we actually analyzed the condition of the vehicle, the physical evidence inside it, and crucially, what was absent, a much more complex scenario emerges.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When the car is processed, they find Joe's mobile phone left behind. They also find 2 pages of handwritten notes and poetry.
Right, the writing.
The writings express a desire to be a stronger brother and request that his personal belongings be given to his younger brother, AJ.
Law enforcement immediately and decisively labeled that document a suicide note, but the family vehemently challenged that classification.
They pointed out the glaring absence of any definitive goodbye.
Exactly. And Justin, the friend from the 4:00 a.m. phone call, provided vital context. He clarified that he and Joe had actually been co-writing that specific poetry earlier in the week.
So it was an ongoing collaborative artistic exercise, not a sudden premeditated farewell document.
Exactly.
And the missing items from the vehicle are even more concerning. His wallet is gone. His keys are missing.
That implies he either locked the car and walked away with them, or someone else took them.
But the most alarming detail is his missing albuterol inhaler. The medical background of the report is clear. Joe suffered from severe environmental allergies. Leaving a primary respiratory device behind is wildly out of character.
It points heavily toward a departure that was sudden, unplanned, or potentially coerced. A person managing severe allergies does not voluntarily leave their rescue inhaler behind if they are simply stepping out for a walk or executing a planned sequence of events.
Then there is the deeply unsettling involvement of the friend identified in the sources as Cammie.
Yes. The family accounts document that this individual allegedly claimed to know the location of Joe's abandoned Corolla prior to it being officially discovered by either the police or the family's search efforts.
That is a staggering detail to leave unresolved. If she knew the location beforehand, did she have access to the vehicle during those 4 days?
That's the critical question.
Was the car accessed or cleaned of potentially embarrassing or incriminating items before law enforcement arrived? Because if a second party interacted with that vehicle after 4:30 a.m. on January 5, the entire theory of a solitary, isolated suicide collapses completely.
It introduces a layer of social circle awareness that the initial investigation seemingly dismissed entirely.
Yeah,
And this brings us to the severe procedural rift between the Bremerton Police Department, specifically Detective Robbie Davis, and the Pichler family.
right.
The BPD locked firmly onto the theory that Joe walked half a mile from his car to the Port Madison Narrows Bridge and jumped. The family cited immediate, shocking investigative anomalies that contradicted that narrative.
Let's talk about the biological evidence, because this is where the tunnel vision becomes glaring. The police eventually release the car back to the family. While inspecting it, the family discovers a substance consistent with vomit on the passenger side floorboard.
They immediately notify the BPD and request a DNA test.
Right, because if that biological material belongs to a second person, it definitively proves someone else was in that car. How does a police department justify ignoring that?
According to the family's account in the review, they didn't just ignore it. The Bremerton Police Department explicitly refused to test the sample. They failed to log it in any official evidentiary reports.
Unbelievable.
The family alleges the department later attempted to gaslight them by claiming no such evidence had ever existed in the first place. The family was so desperate for proper forensic processing that they left the car sitting untouched in their driveway for nearly a year, waiting for a forensic response that never materialized.
And the mishandling wasn't contained just to the vehicle. When Joe's younger brother, AJ, went to check on the Magnuson Way apartment on January 5, he found the front door completely unlocked and all the interior lights left on.
Which the family stated was entirely against Joe's standard habits.
Furthermore, when the family conducted their own secondary sweep of the apartment, they discovered that Joe's collection of magic, the gathering cards, had been targeted.
Yes, this is huge.
The bulk common cards were left scattered across his bedroom closet floor, but his high-value, high-rarity cards had been systematically removed. Anyone familiar with the 2006 hobby gaming community knows that high-rarity cards operated as untraceable cash.
They held significant secondary market value.
That provides a crystal clear financial motive for robbery, or at least a staged scene masking foul play.
Yet the family alleges that when police finally executed a search of the apartment, the entire process lasted approximately 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. There was no systematic effort to dust for fingerprints, no attempt to secure digital assets, and no biological sweep. Law enforcement had already finalized their conclusion at the bridge, rendering the apartment irrelevant in their eyes.
If we look at the actual environmental data surrounding the bridge, does it support the police theory in any way? Bremerton is a major Navy town. It has a heavy security and surveillance footprint.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the environmental evidence at the bridge comprehensively dismantles the suicide theory. When investigators pulled the traffic and business surveillance camera footage along the routes between the parked car and the bridge, they found absolutely nothing.
Wow.
There was no footage of Joe walking toward the water after 4:30 a.m. Even more compelling is the canine tracking data. Professional search dogs are remarkably sensitive and can hold a scent trail for extended periods.
But they found nothing.
When canine units were deployed, they found zero scent trail leading from the Corolla to the bridge structure. They could not verify he was ever on the pedestrian walkway.
What about the water itself?
The hydrological models are the final nail in the theory. Local experts and water flow models confirm that the waterway beneath the Port Madison Narrows Bridge possesses a powerful inward-pushing current.
Inward.
Yes. If a body entered the water at that location, the currents would naturally push it into relatively confined, highly populated inlets, specifically Dyes Inlet or Sinclair Inlet. The statistical likelihood of a body entering that specific, highly trafficked water system and remaining completely undiscovered for 20 years is vanishingly small. Extensive waterborne searches by professional divers and boat crews yielded absolutely zero biological remains or clothing. The physical environment itself rejects the hypothesis.
Which leaves us analyzing the remaining theories. The family, particularly his mother Kathy, completely rejected the suicide conclusion.
Some observers have pointed to the family's strong Catholic background, noting the heavy stigma attached to suicide within that faith.
But the pushback was rooted in evidence, not just theology. Joe's brother, AJ, alongside a friend named Shauna Woody, advanced the theory that the collaborative poetry left in the car was actually a cryptic declaration of intent to start over.
The starting over theory suggests that the psychological weight of his former Hollywood life, combined with the pressures of his new independent reality in Bremerton, became overwhelming. The premise is that Joe voluntarily staged the scene at the car to escape those expectations and begin a new life off the grid. It is a theory that offers hope. However, as the 2026 review starkly notes, absolutely no verified proof of life has emerged in the 2 decades since.
That brings us to the longitudinal perspective of this case.
Yeah.
We are viewing this from the vantage point of 2026.
Right.
Joe Pichler has been missing for 20 years. He remains classified as an endangered missing person and has never been legally declared deceased.
Right.
I think it is vital to provide his identifying markers just so you can visualize him. If he is alive today, he would be 39 years old. He stands 6'2". He has a very distinct circular red Star Wars Rebel Alliance tattoo, the Starbird emblem, on his right inner forearm.
And we must also remember what he had on him when he vanished. He was wearing a unique white metal Nixon watch, the Rotolog model, featuring real wood inlays on his left wrist.
And braces.
Combined with the metal dental braces on his top teeth, utilizing those black rubber bands, these remain his primary identifying physical characteristics.
Reading through the systemic failures detailed in this review over a 20-year span is incredibly frustrating. The detail regarding the 40-day rule is particularly devastating. Can you explain how that state mandate impacted the investigation and the family?
It is a procedural standard that caused immense emotional damage here. In Washington state, there is a mandate requiring law enforcement to formally obtain the dental records of any missing person who has not been located within 40 days of their disappearance.
Okay.
Detective Davis and the BPD confirmed they executed this state mandate. But you have to view this from the perspective of the Pichler family.
Yeah, of course.
Watching the police formally request dental records just over a month into the search was interpreted as an official, bureaucratic admission that law enforcement had entirely given up on finding Joe alive.
That's heartbreaking.
It cemented the agonizing reality that the police were no longer conducting a rescue operation. They were simply waiting for a body to surface.
It is a chilling shift in momentum. You listen to these deep dives, and it is easy to get caught up in the timelines and the forensic debates. But why does this specific 2026 review matter to you, listening right now?
It's a prime example of systemic failure.
Exactly. This case is a masterclass in why we must actively challenge initial narratives. When you are presented with official conclusions that blatantly ignore contradictory facts, like an asthmatic leaving behind an inhaler, stolen high-value assets ignored during a 3-minute search, or potential biological evidence left untested on a floorboard, we have a fundamental duty to question those assumptions.
The review perfectly illustrates that tunnel vision in an investigation doesn't just stall a case. It actively degrades the truth. The failure to secure the Magnuson Way apartment and the refusal to properly log the vehicle's contents aren't minor administrative errors.
No, they're not.
There are catastrophic failures in the preservation of evidence during the most critical 48-hour window of a disappearance.
So what does this all mean? Ultimately, Joe Pichler remains a haunting symbol of the unresolved. He was a young man standing right on the precipice of his adult life, caught in a permanent stalemate between the theories of suicide, foul play, and voluntarily starting over.
Stuck in time.
His documented journey stopped in a parking lot on Wheaton Way, leaving us with nothing but a collaborative poem, an abandoned car, and 20 years of unanswered questions.
Before we close this analysis, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to consider. Think deeply about the digital era in which Joe disappeared. January 2006.
Yeah, totally different world.
Local law enforcement at that time barely comprehended the concept of a digital footprint. They certainly did not possess the tools or the knowledge to analyze online gaming forums or early digital communication platforms.
Right.
Joe was working at Discordia Games. He was deeply embedded in the highly technical, communicative magic, the gathering community. Somewhere out there, existing on a dusty, obsolete server, the chat logs of his coworkers at Discordia Games, or the early network messages from his social circle might still exist.
That's entirely possible.
The actual key to Joe's disappearance may not be resting at the bottom of the Port Madison Narrows. It might be a digital ghost, perfectly preserved in 2006 code, just waiting for someone in 2026 with modern data extraction techniques to finally bring the truth to light.
A digital ghost waiting to be found. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the narrative and keep searching for the truth.